Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Is this thing working? So, thank you for coming out. I'm going to read from my novel that just came out last week, Lost Time Accidents, and I think Colson's going to talk to me a little bit. The novel is about 100 years in the life of a family, and they're somewhat eccentric. And primarily their eccentricity lies in their relationship to time and the passage of time. They think that they have some control over it maybe, or some insight into how it works. And one of my favorite characters, and the many characters that fill the book, is the father of the narrator, who is a science fiction writer, but he writes very mediocre science fiction, actually more like terrible science fiction, and a lot of it is very dirty, pornographic. So I thought it would be fun to read about him tonight. I mean, it's not going to get really dirty. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but there are a couple of little sort of off-color moments that we can all look forward to. And I guess the only other thing that I should say is that the novel is addressed by the narrator to a woman that he had a romantic entanglement with, named whom he refers to as Mrs. Haven. So when you hear the narrator address Mrs. Haven, that's who he's addressing. One of the first clues I got as a child that my father and I hailed from different star systems arrived in the form of a joke. It was in the dog days of a flawless upstate summer, when I'd half convinced myself would never end. I was sitting with my mother in our humid, sun-drenched kitchen, picking at a scab on my left elbow and grumbling about having to go back to school. Orson, my father insisted I refer to him as Orson, never Dad, came up from his writing room in the basement, grinning for some reason I never discovered. He listened to my bitching for as long as he could stand it. There's a Venusian proverb, Waldy, that you might find instructive. I took the bait and asked my father what it was. Time flies like an arrow. He paused for dramatic effect. Fruit flies, on the other hand, like a banana. That was it. He looked from my mother's face to mine, deeply pleased with himself, then let out a belch and retreated downstairs like a squid escaping in a cloud of ink. Orson had a terrible sense of humor, Mrs. Haven. A pulp fictioneer sense of humor, the most cornpone there is. But this joke, in particular, preyed on my 6-year-old mind like a tick. When I found out, years later, that he'd stolen it from the Marx Brothers, I actually danced a little jig. It was Groucho's children's cross to bear, not mine. But I can't help but be reminded of it now, when time isn't flying at all, and my existence has become like that banana, a battered, motionless mass, soft and greasy and passive, with memories harassing it like flies. In one of my father's first published pieces, The Unextended Life, Preposterous Stories, Volume 21, Number 3, 1957, a Department of Motor Vehicles clerk named Silas Strangeways comes across a thumbnail-sized ad on the back page of Volume 21, Number 3 of Preposterous Stories, with fantastically geeky attention to detail that I can't help admiring. The ad was actually run in that same issue, promising escape from his humdrum existence. Are you living the life that your maker intended? Does your life lack the flavor, the crackle, the intensity you've hoped for? Daily, we find ourselves bombarded by 1,000 recommendations for extending the duration of our lives. Exercise 3 times weekly, smoke in moderation, exchange sugar for saccharin. But the truth is that time does not gain value by accruing. Time acquires value by being spent, and spent freely. The longest life is not always the best one. In the majority of cases, just the opposite. If you are, in fact, living the life that your maker intended, it may be time to seek another maker. Prompted, perhaps, by his genre-appropriate surname, Strange Ways answers the ad, and soon finds himself in a bunker with titanium walls, located, for some reason, 60 feet beneath the Statue of Liberty, as a test subject in a top-secret, Pentagon-funded experiment in something known as rotary chronofeedback. The basic idea, explains the ascot-sporting, sherry-sipping scientist in charge, Dr. Hugo von Karst, is to harness the power of certain especially nasty cosmic rays to collapse space-time into a kind of nugget, a diamond, if you will, of pure, unadulterated now, in which every instant of a man's life will occur simultaneously. Karst's pitch is as follows. Your life, Mr. Strangeways, is sadly diluted. It holds precious few pleasures, a handful at best, and with far too much of nothing in between. Imagine, however, the bliss and the terror, the intensity and the passion, if it all were compressed, if you lived your whole life in 1 nanosecond. After some rote hemming and hawing from Strangeways, and some heavily italicized gibberish from Karst about time as mankind's comeuppance for original sin, and mankind itself as a race of undeserving monkeys, and heaven as a kind of perpetual motion machine, Strangeways agrees to have his life compacted. And in no time at all, he's deloused and depilated and basted in radioactive Vaseline and inserted buck naked into a, quote, thrumming titanium cervix. Orson's words, Mrs. Haven, not mine. At which point everyone puts on goggles and the space rays are harnessed and something goes horribly wrong. The experiment has the opposite of the expected result. Instead of living his entire life in a single fervent moment, Strangeways' existence is stretched out so infinitely thin that he might as well not be existing at all. He's traded his brief Judeo-Christian lifespan for a diaphanous kind of immortality. He's sidestepped the life God intended for him and become an accidental God himself. The editors of preposterous stories were not too taken with the unextended life, much to Orson's consternation. They accepted it grudgingly as a kind of stopgap between Titan's Battle by Heinrich Hauser and Warlord of Peace by Leroy P. Yerxa, and paid him half the normal rate per word. Orson sent them an indignant letter, 7 pages long, demanding an explanation for the slight. Their answer took the form of a 9-word postcard, all in caps. More tits, Tolliver. More pointer sisters. More juju fruits. My father scrupulously avoided repeating that error in the 136 stories that followed. From that day onward, his extraterrestrials were nearly always female, dressed inadequately or not at all, and possessed of proud, heaving, pendulous breasts, whenever possible, in multiples of 3. The world, as the saying goes, is full of disappointed men. But my father, Mrs. Haven, was a disappointed child. When I picture the Buffalo, New York of my boyhood, I see a codochromatic checkerboard of buzzing summer lawns, any of which might hide the keys to revelation. For Orson, it was just a purgatory. The conceit of the checkerboard applies to him just as well. I stole it, in fact, from his 17th novel, Monkey Say, Monkey Die. But the board in Orson's case was something monstrous, a horizon-wide grid across which he was fated to be shunted back and forth, the hero of some dated existential pulp by forces beyond his control. The closest he ever came to writing about his childhood was the opening chapter of his second-to-last novel, Salivation is Yours, in which the origin of O2, the perambulator, is told in all its pornographic splendor. Orson was a seasoned purveyor of star porn by then, and could work almost anything into his plots, even genuine human emotion. Working it into conversation, on the other hand, on birthdays, let's say, or during family dinners, was something he preferred to leave to experts. O2, firstborn son of Stokasta, a sentient cloud of dark matter in the Centauri system, has the most monotonous childhood imaginable. He's born, matures, and dies, time and time again, without ever escaping the womb. Stokasta's privates resemble those of any well-built woman, with three important distinctions. They're made out of interstellar gas. They exist in 18 dimensions, including D16, the dimension of smell. And they look like suburban Buffalo, New York in the 1950s. Stokasta's birth canal, we are told, is a bona fide black hole, one whose event horizon, the gravitational boundary across which even light cannot escape, is always just beyond our hero's reach. O2 himself is a pimply, awkward ectomorph with more than a passing likeness to my father. He's fated to be torn to bits, spaghettified in the unapologetically wacky parlance of black hole research, whenever he tries to make a break for it. Luckily for O2, he finds himself reincarnated after each annihilation. Unluckily, he's always reincarnated as himself. In the course of his 18-year journey to the limits of his personal singularity, our hero encounters a series of equally wretched life forms, all of whom have made the mistake of flying their spaceships too close to Stokasta's unmentionables. A dandified pleasure robot, a koala-faced mystic, and a two-headed hydra with, quote, antifreeze eyes, against whom O2 has to battle in order to make his escape. Orson opted for blunt C.S. Lewis-style allegory this time, instead of his default Tolkien-ish vision questing. And the result makes for an uncomfortable read, at least for me. A queasy one-to-one correspondence between fiction and fact. It's easy to recognize his father in the gibberish-spouting mystic. My grandfather was a little koala-shaped in later years. His uncle fits the robot to a T, and I have no doubt at all, given the shadow that Orson's sisters cast over his life, whom the Hydra is supposed to represent. Considering the frustrations of his existence, Mrs. Haven, O2 is remarkably well adjusted. He has nothing against his mother, or Agawot Keech, as her vulva is locally known. He'd just like to see what the rest of the universe looks like. This isn't a bad place to grow up, O2 tells the koala. But by your 1,576,778th iteration, there's not much in the way of novelty. The koala nods sadly and wishes poor, doomed O2 all the best. The Hydra, on the other hand, insists that the universe outside Stokasta is simply more of the same, then tries to turn our hero's skeleton to jelly by shooting psionic nerve blasts from the sockets of its eyes. Regretfully, O2 decapitates the Hydra and continues on his journey, knowing perfectly well that it's pointless, but hoping, as he's done 1,576,777 times before, that everything will turn out for the best. The pleasure bot catches up with him at Agawot Keech's second-to-last bend and gives him a fist-sized ruby from a dainty zirconium purse. My best days are behind me, or I'd come with you, it sighs. This ruby is a piece of genuine space stuff, not like this nebulaic stage set all around us. Put it in your mouth just before you try to force a breach. It might give you a kick in the pants. "Thank you, sir," O2 answers, trying his best to sound enthusiastic. "I think I should point out, however, that you've told me this 1,500,707... Don't talk smart," says the robot. "Look how far that got the koala." By the time O2 finally draws near to the event horizon, he's well into his adolescence, and his surrender to gravity on the eve of his 18th birthday has all the desperate romance of teenage suicide. This time, however, as the robot has promised, things actually do turn out differently. The Ruby catapults O2 to safety, for reasons that remain unclear, at least to me, and a passing star cruiser picks him up just as he runs out of breath. O2 has had plenty of practice being a teenager, but none being an adult, which makes it hard for him to hold down a respectable job. On the other hand, millennia spent inside a cosmic vagina have furnished him with a finely tuned understanding of a woman's wants and needs, which expertise he makes use of, regular as a timing cog, for the next 147 pages. In trademark Orson Card Tolliver style, no detail of the perambulator's amorous adventures is spared us, no matter how cringeworthy. My father sinned in all sorts of ways as an author, Mrs. Haven, as well as a father, but the sin of omission was not one of them. So that's all I was planning to read, so thank you very much. Were you hiding back there this whole time? Colson Whitehead, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't, but you take that. I'll take this, thank you.
Switch. Okay, so what are we going to talk about?
Your incredible book.
Oh, thank you.
And we're going to thank the people for coming and the Strand for putting a shindig together.
All right, thank you, people. Thank you, Strand.
So I was psyched that you read an Orson bit. All the 60s pulp stuff is really great. The titles and names of the characters.
It was the most
curious
fun.
Blotches. The Voyage of the Silver Esophagus. And from that page, BX6 Hybe. How do you pronounce that?
I don't know.
Okay, very good. I picked this sort of space amoeba sort of floating through the stellar wastes.
Well, a lot of that was definitely maybe the most fun part of the whole book, is it was having a character who's, who writes science fiction, which is just obviously as a genre so fun to talk about and fun to attempt to write, but also someone who's really bad at it, or really just kind of absurd, as many science fiction authors were, But I went to the 42nd Street Library early on and just found this catalog of all the titles of basically not only every novel, but every short story that was ever published. Just its title and its date and, the publication.
In the big 60s magazines, or like of all
just
time?
All the way. I think the index that I found started in, 1900 or something and went up through the 80s. And there were just so many unbelievably incredible titles of science fiction stories and novels in there that I almost couldn't think of any that were as amazing and funny as some of the titles were,
Well, I know as a young child, you read comics and science fiction. So what actually good science fiction writers were inspiring when you were formulating this book and thinking how you want to do it, what do you want to keep, what you want to throw out?
I went back when I started writing this book. I mean, one of the motivations for doing it was that it would give me a sort of an excuse to revisit all of these authors, like Theodore Sturgeon and Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and so many different people, and Ursula Le Guin. But what I realized, that at least as the novel kind of took shape and I figured out what I wanted to do, most of those writers were of course very good, and so they weren't actually that useful to me, because I was kind of writing about terrible science fiction, So then I had to, and I'd forgotten all the bad science fiction that I read back then. The good books stay with you and you forget the bad stuff. And so then I had to really search for like really over the top, terrible science fiction writing. And I mean, there's plenty of that, of course, you know, but unlike really, really bad, I don't know, realism, which is no fun to go back and read. Like the terrible, like there are all these wonderful anthologies that I found. There was one pulp anthology that I'd found, just pulled randomly from a bookshelf, called On an Odd Note. And that was amazing. That's an amazing book. I think I still have it in my bathroom. It's just, oh my God, there's some outrageously terrible writing in there.
Well, you said it was fun to write a lot of the Orson parts, and this book is has many more jokes than, say, Lowboy, which was grim and intense. So what was it like to let your comedic personality on the page?
Yeah, I thought it would be easier. I thought it would be, you know, or just more fun to write a book that had more levity in it. But in fact, it's not any easier at all. It's probably harder, at least for me. It's not, there seems to be almost no relation between cracking jokes when you're, you know, when you're just talking with somebody at a bar or something, and writing in a comedic way that isn't incredibly annoying by about page 6.
And you have to wait 2 years for the people to laugh at your jokes.
At least.
It's funny or not funny, yeah, like,
right.
Or 5 years, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. Yeah. I mean, and any joke, no matter what it is, no matter how brilliant it is, if you've told it 3 or 4 times, is not funny to you anymore. So when you're revising comic writing, you can't tell what's funny and what isn't funny anymore. It very quickly disappears. Have you found that to be true?
I'm so desperate for affirmation. I'm always like, I think it's still funny. I hope it's still funny. And then when it comes out, maybe people laugh. But
do you test some of the funny stuff out on anybody?
I guess I like readings, you know, stuff I'm working on. So, you know, I do readings all throughout the year.
Oh, if you give a reading, that's where you'll test it out?
Yeah, so I'll, you know, the more dense stuff I find hard to read, so I tend to read more jokey stuff. And so that's the way to test drive some of the so-called humorous parts in the book.
Yeah, well, funny stuff is definitely way easier to read in front of people. It's terrible to, my first book didn't have, I think had 1 joke in it in the entire book, or 1.5 jokes.
What was it?
Oh God, what the hell was it? Maybe there were 0 jokes in there.
Okay, sure.
I mean, that was so long ago. No, it is, you kind of busted me right there, which is kind of mean.
I apologize. Man.
No, what was the joke? Now I'm gonna spend the rest of our conversation trying to remember this one joke, which wasn't even funny. But it was then terrible to read from that book in front of people because, you know, it was just this, like, you know, tomb-like silence, which I guess was appropriate because it was, again, kind of a grim book.
Right.
I don't know. But no, then we actually, Colson and I went on a book tour together, a very short one. And you were occasionally reading funny stuff from, it was the Colossus of New York, your book about New York City.
Yeah, or maybe John Henry, I think. It was like 2001 or something, 2002.
I'm pretty sure it was Colossus. Maybe because it was new stuff. Maybe you were reading new stuff.
Maybe I was, yeah.
But anyway, people were laughing because Colson was reading funny stuff. And then, you know, either before that or after that or whenever, I would have to read this, like, it was just terrible. You know, I was like, I'm never going to read serious stuff again, ever. And Colson's, the people who came to see Colson read were all like young, hip, cool kids. And you even made fun of me about this. And the people came, because my first book was kind of about World War II. And the people who came to see me were all like these like really tired and unhappy looking old people.
Well, you know, around the same time, you know, John Henry Days came out, and I had a big reading with Chuck Palahniuk and a woman named Heather McGowan, and Fight Club had just come out, the movie. And my dad, who was sort of a cold person, came to my reading, and it was a big, huge Barnes & Noble, and he looked out into the audience, and it was just pierced weirdos, all here to see Chuck Palahniuk. No one, you know, was there to see me. And my dad was like, now I know who reads, you know, Colson's books. Freaks. Freaks. Like, you know, not, so it goes around, comes around.
But Heather McGowan was also reading with you at the time?
Yes, yeah. Her book, Schooling.
Wow, which is such a great book. But I cannot imagine Chuck Palahniuk's fans having any patience for...
Well, no, it's like a mod squad, you know, the black guy, white lady.
Yeah.
No one wants to see anyone there to see Chuck Palahniuk, and
they're all just there for because he has an army. He has an army that comes. That, or I don't know if he still does. But
books since then, many books.
Right.
I remember he had to be talked. I think it was 2006, and I was written a short book, and you were like, "Short books are the way to go. Longies will kill you." And I was like, "Yes, short books don't do. They're the way to go. Longies will kill you."
Yeah.
But now
did I say longies? I said longies.
That's my. I teach writing, so that's craft talk.
Oh, okay. Right.
Shorties versus longies. So now you have a longie again. Lowboy was
my book about Mexican wolves. Yes. Lobo
was very linear and concise, compressed.
Right.
Just you're letting it rip.
Right. Well, yeah. Right. Yeah, it was like.
I think we actually made a pact, no more longies, and then you went back on it.
Did we make a pact of that kind? I really believe that short books. Yeah, I think I did. I gave you a whole spiel about how no book should ever be longer than 212 pages.
And how many pages is this one?
It's a little bit extra. It's like a little bit extra, yeah. But it just takes. And I was right because it took so long to write this book. It took 7 years. And that is just a little too long, I found out.
Was it always this sort of size and shape that you...
It was longer. It was actually longer and got cut down quite a bit. But yeah, the book covers 100 years in the life of a family, and even though it definitely does not cover that entire time, there are, it skips around a lot. It bypasses whole eras. Like the Vietnam era in the United States is covered in a paragraph or something. But still, it's just, I found out that if you're going to write a book that covers 100 years and has more than, 2 characters, it's just got to be long, and it's got to take you a long time. I don't know. Maybe I'm just slow. It's possible. You are so incredibly efficient and fast. It drives me insane.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know. So Colson actually will say, I'm pretty sure that my book will be done on the 15th of April, 2019 or whatever. And then it is. You finish on the day you said you were going to finish. That's fucking crazy.
Well, I don't have any hobbies. So that's one thing. And maybe that brings us to
the question about my hobbies and what.
You're a musician. That's why we first met. You were in a band with my cousin.
That's
in college,
true. That is true.
I was like 23, living on Ludlow Street, and you guys came and crashed on my floor.
That is right. You were writing for the Village Voice at the time.
Yeah, and to check out the city. So, as someone from no hobbies, you still play music. How does playing music inform your writing? Vice versa? How do these different sort of forms?
I really. I was just in D.C. the day before yesterday, and that was a question someone asked me there, and I really want to say, it's been very important, and it's really shaped my sense of pacing or rhythm or anything. But I really don't know, and I think maybe it hasn't had much of an effect. I was never really. I never really felt as though I really knew what I was doing when I was making music. I thought I was just I was just trying to kind of make something that was like a hybrid of music that I liked. And I guess it's funny because I think in a way that's what most writers do too. But somehow I think it's what I do. But I don't question it the same way. When I was playing music, I always felt kind of like a fraud in some way.
But it's also the thrill of collaboration as opposed to like this.
That is true.
Yourself,
that is the best thing about it. And the other great thing about music is that if you're playing music with people, even if it's if it's great, that's wonderful. But even if it's not fully baked or it's just not that great, it's still fun to do. Whereas writing is never fun to do.
Yes. Yeah.
But if it's bad writing, it's definitely not going to be enjoyable if you sense that it's not good. So I don't know, but yeah, the collaboration of being in a band can be very frustrating, but it's definitely something I miss with writing, And I wish that there were, sometimes you have these thriller writers or mystery authors or science fiction authors who will tag team, they'll write a book together in certain genres, and I always thought that sounded amazing and would be really fun, but probably in reality it would be a huge pain in the ass. It sounds excruciating, but it sounds excruciating to you. See, it sounds good to me.
Okay, yeah.
I was going to ask you if you wanted to do one together. I guess not.
So the book just came out. A lot of reviews are mentioning your tendency to just change it up from book to book.
That's true.
You started off in 1930s Austria, and you went to 19th century America, contemporary New York and Lowboy.
Yeah.
Or Lobo.
Lobo is well in the yeah, with your kids when you're teaching them you call it Lobo, right?
And now you're exploring the vast space-time continuum. So is it the David Bowie in you? You're always hopping around?
That's it. That's a funny question. I mean, I cannot answer yes to that because that would just sound so ridiculous, you know. But I don't know why it started. That I started consciously wanting to do something different each time. You know, there was a write-up just last week in the LA Times that questioned whether that was a very wise course to take because, you know, you build up readers who like a certain book and then maybe, you know, if you completely offer them something totally different the next time, they might not be that into it. But you do a little bit of that. It's not as though you just work in a narrow field at all. I mean, you've written books that are, you know, historical. You've written books that are, you know, I mean, if you compare The Intuitionist, John Henry Days in Zone 1, let's say, or Sag Harbor 2, I mean, other than your sensibility, there's not really a through line there.
Well, for me, I'm just so bored, like when I'm done with something that's like,
really the answer, yeah.
You know, Intuition is about elevator inspectors. I hate elevators. I always walk up the stairs now.
I didn't know that.
I hate zombies now.
So when you see one coming, you go the other way.
Yes, I do. So I find everything in the house. So for me, it's just sort of, you know, once I've sort of done something, I don't want to go back to it and try something else.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But you were okay with elevators before The Intuitionist?
I loved elevators.
And then you just won't go into them anymore?
No, I walk up the stairs.
Wow. Still?
Rappel down.
You rappel from, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Have you considered paragliding at all? Because that would work. You have to be up pretty high, though.
Yeah. So here's a garbage question.
Okay, garbage, I don't like garbage.
If you had a time machine, what would you do with it? I assume you don't have one, but if you did have one, what would you do?
First of all, that's quite an assumption. I don't know if I had a time machine. Well, you'd have to get up the guts first of all, because there are a lot of open questions as to what that might do. You know, it's quite possible that you would get in the time machine and, you know, especially if you're traveling into the past, you know, would just kind of disappear when you did that, because who knows what the repercussions are. We all know this about time travel, right? But I really don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. I would probably go into the past because the future is just like too horrifying to even think about, you know. I have not really thought about that very much, and it's funny. I don't really have an answer.
No one asked you that garbage question before?
No. But I mean, this is only like, I mean, I've only done a couple events for the book, so this is probably good. You know, by next time I'll have an answer for that.
Okay.
I mean, if I knew that I could just step out, spend 15 minutes, and just get right the hell back in, then I would go all over the place. You know, I would try out all sorts of different eras. You know, but the fear is that you would get somewhere. Like, let's say you decided to go to the Middle Ages, and then, you know, the time machine blows a fuse or something, and you're just fucking stuck there with everyone has bad teeth, and, you know, you're going to die in 8 years, and there's a lot of flagellation, you know, and all that stuff.
Plus,
where would you
racism,
go?
Well, racism has a big factor.
That is true.
Louis C.K. has a sort of thing about that, like...
Oh, I know that. Yeah, I know that routine you're talking about. What does he say exactly? He says,
as a white guy, I go back in time anywhere and be okay.
Right, you know,
exactly. I think he seems pretty happy about that.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I couldn't go back to 1950s Georgia, really, unless I had papers or, you know, free papers, as they were called.
Right.
So it's more complicated.
1950s, or did you say 1850s?
1950s.
You still might want to get a haircut.
Yes. Yeah. Sure.
So where would you go then? I mean, let's say you could go anywhere on Earth too. Like, you wouldn't have to just go to New York. You know, if you could travel through space as well as time, Colson, where would you go?
Well, I have a weird, like, saving celebrities from killing themselves fantasy, where I'm like, it's like the day before Kurt Cobain killed himself, and I'm like, Kurt, don't do it. You know? Or David Bowie, it's like, I would go to David Bowie the day before he died and be like, thanks. You know?
Yeah. Oh, that is sweet, actually.
You know, I wrote David Bowie twice, so obviously still weighing on me.
Would you go to David Bowie like right before the Glass Spider tour and just say, just, you know, just take a break, you know.
Well, you have to
take a year off.
You have to fail.
Bowie.
You have to fail. Pick yourself back up again.
Right.
You know.
Sure. Yeah. No, you're right. That's probably part of his. Yeah. He certainly was able to fail and pick himself back up. But did he do anything really good post Glass Spider?
I like the last record that he.
The last record.
The last
okay.
one.
Yeah.
Captain
Sure.
Before we get to questions from the audience, I know
we'll talk about David Bowie.
I know you hate to talk about what you're working on. So what are you working on?
Because you know I hate to talk about it.
Yeah. So.
That's actually it's not true. I don't hate to talk about it.
Whenever I ask you, you're like, oh,
is that true? Well, every book sounds stupid. The reason I think that authors don't like to answer this question is not that they're like superstitious about it. It's just that every book sounds stupid when you try to sum it up in 5 or 6 sentences to someone, and then you see like on they're like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, man. Like they don't even follow what you're saying, or they just think it sounds.
But when you were
absurd.
describing this, and you're like, and it's called The Lost Time Accident, I was like, that is the shit.
Oh, you like the title? That's true. Yeah. If you have the title set up. Yeah, I mean, if you asked me what the name of the next book was, then that would be. Anyway, this book took me so long to write, and I just was really dying to do something else. So I've written a whole first draft of a very short book. I think it might even be
shorties.
It's definitely a shorty, to use the industry speak.
Yeah.
That takes place mostly in Pakistan and Afghanistan, about an American teenager who. In the 90s, who wants to be a mujahideen and goes over there, and
that sounds great, man.
Turns out to not be the best idea.
That sounds great, but no title yet.
No. I don't know what I'm. But it's there, which is an amazing relief, because that's what I always thought was the way to go when you're promoting a book, to just be completely, deeply into the new thing, so you're not that terrified about everything connected to promoting a book, which is very scary stuff.
Excellent. Now we're going to open it up to you guys. Any questions for Mr. John Wray?
Questions?
No question too difficult.
Ooh, that's not the spot.
We have a young man in the audience.
Oh, you young sir.
This might be great. We're all in trouble now. This might be a tough question to answer, but if you had to place your book in a triangle graph between Steve Ditko's,
the answer is yes.
Steve Ditko's Doctor Strange.
Okay, which Doctor Strange?
The early Doctor Strange is Steve Ditko.
The Ditko Doctor Strange.
Ditko Doctor Strange. Douglas Adams.
Right, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
And Naked Lunch.
I would say very far from Naked Lunch. It's not. There are really only two sections of the book that are really grim in the way that Naked Lunch is grim. I mean, Naked Lunch is also very funny. So, but I would say, not very close to Naked Lunch, closest to Douglas Adams, but pretty close to the Ditko era Doctor Strange at times, because it gets kind of. There's some sci-fi in it, but there's also like a little bit of fantasy in it. Although it's one of these books where it remains an open question whether. Did you just put that back?
No, what happened?
Wow. So we got a little Doctor Strange action up here.
Well, yeah, I think I was sort of asking before about sort of positive time traveling models for you. So books or movies that were inspiring when you were thinking about
yeah, I saw there was this movie called I think Christopher Reeve was in, called A Question of Time, A Matter of Time.
Somewhere in Time.
Somewhere in Time. Yeah. Thank you. I remember. I mean, that movie had a real impression on me when I saw it on like late night TV in the 80s or something. And then I found the book it was based on just on the curb, actually, while I was working on this, just in my neighborhood. And I reread it, and it's very different from the film version, but still very good. I mean, when you start writing about time, even if you're focusing on time travel, which this book doesn't really do, it's about time in many senses, you realize that it's just everywhere. It's everywhere. I mean, every time I would have a conversation with someone and tell them what I was working on, they would say, oh, well, have you, there's that wonderful chapter in The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann in which there's the snowstorm, and that's just, and then someone else will mention, a Kurt Vonnegut novel or something else, and it's even kind of talked about in this book when Orson, the character I was reading about, is trying to write his own novel about time and time travel. He realizes it's everywhere and you can't avoid it. You can't not write a novel about time. How could you possibly? You can't have a conversation really without talking about time in some way.
Was it hard to find the sort of rhetoric of physics and time travel? I mean, you talked about finding language for jokes, but I was reading the book and thinking, it's sort of over my head, but I'm with it. I feel like John knows what he's talking about. So you pull off that really hard trick of getting the dense stuff onto the page in an artistic way. But how did you come to find the rhetoric of science in the book?
It was really very hard. It was very hard because I'm not someone who has any particular ability in that direction, So that's one of the reasons why it took so long to write the book, is that I had to try to educate myself in this stuff that I always kind of avoided in college and in school, I mean, the good thing about writing a book is that you're in control. You can slow things down. You can take as much time as you want. You can write something that just completely fails to explain a difficult physics concept, and then you can just rework it until it reaches a point of intelligibility. I mean, it's like having the same conversation over and over and being able to rewind it and have the conversation again until you're actually, someone who's fun to talk to, basically.
As in life.
That's right. Well,
other questions for the young man?
Yes, you in the longshoreman over there, row 3.
Thank you.
Fleet Week.
So we're talking. I forgot my hat though, sadly. Talking a lot about science fiction and some of the headier things in the book. Getting kind of down to brass tacks, you do this incredible job of writing about many different eras, as you mentioned, but 1960s New York. And I'm just kind of wondering what kind of research went into that. And you go so far as to write an article in another voice. And I was wondering if you'll speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
The famous Joan Didion chapter.
I know, right? The infamous Joan Didion. Actually, there was a review that came out last week that was, it was a Goodreads review, which was generally fairly favorable, but this guy was so ticked off.
I thought it was great. It totally worked.
Well, he did not think so.
No.
And he was outraged. And he said, I went to the back and I looked at the acknowledgments, daring to hope that, Joan Didion was thanked in the back and that they have some kind of relationship, but obviously he has no relationship with Joan Didion, I mean, I thought it was an affectionate homage.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a parody. I thought, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it was maybe a slight parody, but mostly an homage. I don't know. I just thought it would be fun. I actually love Joan Didion, and she has that very particularly in the White Album and Slouching Towards Bethlehem, she has that very particular kind of rhetoric that she uses, and I thought it would be fun to do. And 60s New York, I really didn't do much research about New York in the 60s at all. I think I read one book that I just happened to be reading this book called Kafka Was the Rage, which was about mostly 50s New York, actually, but the kind of beatnik era of New York and the West Village in particular, and the magazines that were, it was sort of so I was reading about literary New York, and I thought it would be funny for this really kind of terrible hack kid who's very enthusiastic about his science fiction stories, but is totally out of place. He moves to New York thinking that he'll just be this writer in New York, but then he realizes that everyone in the village where he lives is into, Kafka and Anne Sexton and and have no interest or time for science fiction at all, and just he's a loser basically in one of the more exciting times to be in New York City, and he just has no fun. I thought that would be funny.
I thought like that's how I would be if I was in New York in the 60s.
Maybe.
Like to sort of hold up, not mixing.
You don't think you would have even gone to see John Coltrane or anything?
Yeah,
you wouldn't.
Blocks down. Like, nah.
You don't think you would have ever gone into the Village Vanguard if you lived in 2 blocks away in the 60s?
They had 3 channels. They had NBC, ABC. you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Is this the first time you've had Buffalo, your hometown, one of your books?
Yeah, basically, yeah. And I wanted to, I always wanted to, no, that's not true. I didn't want to write about it for a long time. But I thought it would be fun. I thought it would be fun to write about this time. And, you know, when I first gave the book to my mom to read, the only thing that I thought there was going to be all sorts of stuff that she had issues with, but the only thing she cared about was that the people in her neighborhood in Buffalo would think it was inaccurate in its representation of Buffalo, New York. Well, people from Buffalo are very touchy. They're very touchy. They can't catch a break. You know, they feel as though they've been unfairly dumped on. You know, if you get my mom talking about like Johnny Carson, for example, because he used to make a lot of jokes about, oh, is it snowing in Buffalo? You know, and she hates Johnny Carson. She hates him. It's really violent, her feelings towards Johnny Carson, you know? She'll I mean, trust me, she'll go on like an hour-long rant.
And Leno, how'd you feel about Jay Leno?
She's not a Leno fan either, you know, at all. But, and then there was a show called, with Dabney Coleman called Buffalo Bill. Is that what it's called, Buffalo Bill?
It was called Buffalo Bill.
And she hates that show. Because the whole joke of that show is that Dabney Coleman is stuck in Buffalo at some like bad news station, and why is he stuck in Buffalo, blah, blah, blah.
With the young Gina Davis?
Really?
Yeah, that was one of our first things.
Damn. You really have spent some time with those three networks.
Anything more from the audience? Advice for a young author?
Yes, if anyone has any advice for me, please.
I've got one. I know you said you'd redact the Glass Spider Tour, but if you could pick one album by Bowie to redact from the canon.
To redact from the canon, wow, that is, you know, does it have to be a solo David Bowie album? Because I'm not a big fan of Tin Machine. Oh, do we have a Tin Machine fan in the audience?
I didn't mean to start anything.
Just lost a sale.
I know, yeah, it's one book less. I guess I might say Tin Machine. I mean, I really, that's a good question. Yeah, I think I'm going to stick with Tin Machine.
Cool.
I wasn't a big fan of Outside, that collaboration with Brian Eno that he did in 2000. But at least there's something going on there. I mean, Tin Machine is really just, I don't know, he's attempted to have a grunge record or something. I don't even know it. I mean, it should have been good because there were good people playing. Okay, I'm done talking about Tin Machine.
Well, if there's no other questions, I just want to give... Oh,
one more?
So this is a weird question. What genre would you not ever attempt or have any interest in doing? Like even
that's a good question.
Inspired by or something.
Oh, wow. Self-help. I mean, I not that I wouldn't want to, but it would be a bad idea for me to write a self-help book for many reasons. No, a fictional genre. That's I don't know. Maybe vampire fiction. I want
to say zombie, right? But
yeah, I was like. I was, first I was going to say like a bodice ripper, like a romance, but I think that would actually be really fun to write, And I don't think it would be good, but it would be fun. And there's some genre I'm forgetting, like maybe like a humor book. I would never want to write like
history.
Yeah, if we're talking about
Battle of Waterloo or something.
Yeah, like a textbook kind of thing. Definitely not. But I would hate to have to write like one of those Dave Barry books, or like one of those books that comedians write. I mean, some are good, but somehow that gives me the creeps even just think about it. Especially Dave Barry. I don't know why I hate Dave Barry so much, but okay, that is my answer. I'm going to go with that. I'm going to stick with that.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for both so much for coming out.